So today we're going to discuss about Orchestrator, so which is a very useful component of UiPath, which used to manage everything about your automation, right? So we'll discuss about the dashboard, how we should be able to secure it, how we should be able to create a user, groups, folder permissioning, and a lot of other stuff. We'll also see the difference between the various terms that we use. So we use a different interchangeable terms like robots, machines, jobs, processes, those kind of things. And then we'll discuss how we should be able to publish our automation to the orchestrator so that we should be able to run it into unattended mode, or how we should be able to schedule it to run on a different time zones. And then we have two other topics listed here, but we'll not be covering them as I told you. So I'll not be covering the work queues, and I'll not be covering the work example with the queues. We'll be covering that into a separate session, right? So let's quickly get started and try to understand what is UiPath Orchestrator. Okay, so UiPath Orchestrator is a web-based application. It is a web-based application built on a top of .NET framework that enables you to orchestrate. When I say orchestrate, that means it controls your UiPath robot in executing the repetitive business process, right? So orchestrator is not only responsible for executing your bot, but it's also responsible to manage the things in around it, right? So deploying a bot and running it is a one aspect, right? But there are certain other things we also control and we configure using the UiPath Orchestrator, right? So if you look at the screen that I have put here, so we have three major components, right? So we have UiPath Studio, then we have UiPath Orchestrator, then we have UiPath Robot, right? UiPath Studio is basically a tool that will help you to digitize your process, right? UiPath Orchestrator is a tool that basically manage and secure your automation. It controls, monitor, not only control and monitor, but also provides you a KPI around how your processes are working into production environment. And if you need to create a report on top of it, you should be also able to create a report that look, my automation has completed so and so hour into the production. So you should be able to give the detail about the KPI and the performance of your bot as well using the UiPath Orchestrator. And then there is a third component which is called UiPath Robot. That's basically the actual executor, the worker who works to run your automation, right? So now let's talk about what are the main capabilities or main component of UiPath Orchestrator. And this is a very common interview question asked, right? So people will ask you, could you please list out me the UiPath Orchestrator main capability, what you should be able to do from the UiPath Orchestrator. So the first thing that we can do is we can provision machine, we can create a connection between robots, right? That maintains the basically connection. When I say the web application here, that means UiPath Orchestrator web application and the robot, right? Then it also provides a UI capability to deploy, right? It assures that the correct delivery of package is happening for your robot for the execution, right? So it controls that which update of the robot has to be executed, right? So if you are changing your process again and again and you are deploying that code, right? So version is getting changed. So it will ensure that the deployment happens in such a way that robots gets the correct execution. And then we have a configuration. So bot also maintains and deliver robot environment and process configuration. Environment is a keyword that is being removed now. So basically now it works on a folder structure. Previously, prior to 2020.10, there is a concept of environment, but now they have removed this concept of environment with a folder. So previously what they used to do is they used to group your folder on the basis of environments, right? So say for example, if in your organization there are multiple teams, right? HR team is there, IT team is there, legal team is there. So they are creating three different environment, and the robot specific to HR will be going to HR environment. But now we have removed the concept of environment. So we have a folder structure. So for logical grouping of bots, we create folders, right? So we'll see that. I'll also help you to explain how we should be able to create a folder and all those kind of things. Okay. And then we have another important feature of a UiPath Orchestrator is called UiPath queues, right? So why queues is important? So queues is basically, there could be a scenario that you have a one bot, right? That may not be able to complete the task even if it is run 24/7, right? So in those cases, what you need to do, you need to distribute your workload between the different robots so that the multiple robots can work at the same time and ensure that there is a no race around condition and there is no conflict in a terms of updating the status and all those things. And that's the reason queues is used. So queues basically ensures that the automatic workload distributions happens across the robot, and you should be able to run bot on a multiple robot, right? Then we have a monitoring. Monitoring is pretty useful for the support person because they also need to understand what is happening with the bot, right? How the bot is running, right? Whether a bot is failing and all those kind of things. So basically you have a dashboard. From that dashboard you should be able to monitor the performance of your robot, right? And then very similar to all other application we have in the world, we have a logging, right? So that's basically store and index the logs on a SQL database. So UiPath Orchestrator is a web-based application, right? That means data has to be stored somewhere, and that data gets stored in a SQL database, right? Or you should be additionally able to configure Elasticsearch and Kibana if you want to create a visualization on a top of it. So we'll look at those options in a next slide where we'll talk about different UiPath architecture logical decomposition, right? And then very important point, which is interconnectivity, right? So UiPath Orchestrator work as a central point of communication for any third party solution and application. So say for example, you want to automate and you want to communicate with other third party system like CyberArk, right? Or maybe could be Workday or ServiceNow, right? So what you should be able to do, you should be able to create a authentication and provide the access and everything so that third party system can communicate with the orchestrator, and if they can communicate with your orchestrator, that means they can be able to communicate with the robot, right? So that's the basically a very useful feature of interconnectivity through APIs. That's correct. So let's quickly move and let's look at UiPath architecture, and this is also you need to understand it very carefully because there will be a lot of questions coming from this. Okay, people will ask a lot of question on this, and they'll ask you, could you please help me to explain what is the architecture of UiPath orchestrator, right? So the first thing, the first keyword that you need to understand is it serves the client and server side, right? So there is a client side and there is a server side. So it's basically it looks like a two-tier architecture, but actually it's a three-tier architecture, right? But for sake of simplicity, let's understand it. There are certain things which are at the client side and there are certain things which are the server side. So the top where you see this executor, studio, UiPath robot services, mobile and the browser, they are client side. And then we at the server side, we have three different components. One is called presentation layer. Then we have a web service layer, and then we have a persistent layer, right? So the backend operation of UiPath architecture are handled by the server side, right? All the activities, workflow created by users are saved in a form of SAML file, right? But to execute that, UiPath Orchestrator pick the functions from the database and guide the robot to work as per the code, right? And at the same time, logs are also saved in the backend. So if you look at this diagram, right, at the presentation layer, we have a web application, and that web application is nothing but your orchestrator. The web application that is shown there, which says HTML, backslash JavaScript, that's your orchestrator, right? So you should be able to access your orchestrator from browser. You should be also able to access your orchestrator through mobile application. There is a mobile application as well for the orchestrator through which you should be able to access your orchestrator. So you should be able to run your automation on the fly by just scrolling through your mobile, right? And then at the presentation layer, you also see there are certain communication happening between UiPath robot to the web service layer, right? And that's the core component of UiPath orchestrator. So it has combination of multiple things. One is API implementation and business logic, and then you have a REST API endpoint. So for UiPath, everything that you do like configuration, logging, monitoring, queues, all can be handled through the API, right? So same thing, web application, which is the UiPath orchestrator web application, is also using the REST API to perform those tasks. UiPath robot service is also using the same set of web services to perform those tasks. And if you want to perform any of these tasks like configuration, logging, monitoring, queues, you should be also able to do using the web service layer into third-party application using OData REST API endpoint, right? Got it? So that's a web service layer. So web service layer provides you a various services, and those services are being consumed by the presentation layer. Those services are being consumed by robot services, and those services can be also consumed outside of the UiPath Orchestrator boundaries in a third-party application using the OData REST API. Right? Right? Now, at the server side, you also look at one component that I am showing is a Kibana, and right, and we have a Elasticsearch, and we have a SQL Server, and we have a Redis. So what are the benefit and what they are actually doing here, right? As I told you, UiPath Orchestrator is a web-based application, right? So data has to be persisted somewhere. So it can be persisted in any, although in the screen, it looks like it's a Microsoft SQL Server, but that's not true. Data can be stored in a, Amazon RDS. It can be stored in, other, database which supports the SQL Server construct, right? So it's not necessary to be Microsoft SQL Server, but it could be, Azure, it could be, Amazon RDS, it could be other databases as well, right? The only thing is that it should support certain functionality which is listed over the UiPath architecture page. So if those functionalities are being supported by any database, it could be installed anywhere, right? And now let's talk about this Elasticsearch and Kibana piece together, right? So these are commonly known as ELK, okay? Elasticsearch, Logstash, and Kibana. The beauty of this tool are these are pretty much open source tool, and they basically provides you the visualization on the top of your logs, right? In many organization, in many organization, what we have seen is people are not storing the log in only in the SQL Server, but they are also storing the logs in a Elasticsearch, because Elasticsearch provides you a better way of searching your logs. You should be able to create visualization or dashboard on a top of your logs. You should be also able to create alerts. You should be also able to create and configure many things on a top of it. So that's the reason people are using Elasticsearch and Kibana. Not only Elasticsearch and Kibana, there are some other tools like Splunk that can be also used here, right? So lot of other tools can be used here. The beauty here is UiPath writes the log in a log4j, right? So any tool which supports the log4j architecture, they should be able to store the logs, right? So that's pretty much about the logical decomposition of UiPath architecture. And if people will ask you about, so basically you need to explain the client side. So on the client side, we have a browser through which we can access the web orchestrator. Then we have UiPath robot services, which is being used by the studio and the robot. And then we have a mobile application as well. In the presentation layer, we have a web application. And then there are a lot of web services which are responsible for managing everything into the UiPath Orchestrator, like configuration, logging, monitoring, and queues.